Hello, folks. We're going to talk a little bit tonight about the fascist left and why they are the way they are. Why are liberals the way they are? Many of us have looked at some of the things that they've said and done over the years, and we're just like, how in the world, do people think that way? And how do they make these statements? And how do they act the way that they do and get away with it? And we just can't understand it. And people just, as a natural process, we want to understand people around us, especially people who are close around us. And liberals are all over the place, and so we want to understand them. And especially those of us who are hoping that maybe we can, kind of swing things back in a different direction. We want to know, how do I get to them, and what makes them tick, so. And I just wanted to touch on a few things because it's very difficult. It should not be, but it is. And it takes a long time sometimes to actually figure some of this stuff out. And even after you know who they are and what they are and why they act the way they do, they still shock you. Just because if you're a normal, reasonable, common sense human being, it is impossible to understand a liberal because they're not. And that's the thing you have to understand. Michael Savage wrote about it years ago, wrote a book about it. Liberalism is a mental disorder. And if you haven't read it, you need to. And he's absolutely right. And it's a mental order in a different way. It's in the sense that they are trained to think in a different way than you and I are trained to think. They don't have any critical thinking skills. They're indoctrinated. And the reason that they are is found in the very basis of their ideology. Liberalism, Marxism, progressivism, communism, Democrat, call them what you want. They're all revolutionaries nowadays by nature. They're revolutionaries and they're reactionaries, okay? And so everything that they do is about going out and fighting the good fight and fighting the war, and we're going to make it all better, and life's going to be great, and we're going to win, and we're going to get this new utopia where we're all going to be happy. We're all going to be happy once we win this fight, but for right now, we're in this big fight. And so it's all about revolution. And so what do revolutionaries do? The revolutionaries don't really stand for anything. They're against the status quo. They're against tradition, and they're against the normalized peoples of a particular area, and they want to change it. Everything is about change, and you hear that word change all the time. I've heard it all my life from Democrat candidates. It's time for a change. Vote for me. We're going to change, so it's always about change. It's always about something different. It's always fighting against something. And so this is what they do. Now, the intellectuals of the movement are a little bit different. They know what they're doing, and they're using people to make that change. They actually have an idea of what's coming, but they have to defeat the traditional government and society and culture that exists in order to actually bring about that change that they want. And so they use the rank and file. And in order to use the rank and file, you have to make a bunch of little revolutionaries out of them. And how do you do that? In every revolution that you've ever seen, how do they do that? They stir them up. You got to stir up the crowds. You have this really volatile language that you use. It's all based on emotion, and this is where it's all key. It's about emotion. It's not about reason and logic. It's about emotion, 100%. And so that's what they do. They stir up, especially the youth, and they use emotional arguments in order to do it. And this is how you get the division, the racism, the classism, and all this type of stuff. And so they've always done it. They always will do it. It's been that way since, even back in the times of serfdom and stuff, it was the same. You had the king in the castle, and all of the people out in the county, were going to get stirred up, and they were going to storm the castle someday. We're going to take it over. And that kind of attitude of the little guy against the big guy has been, utilized for centuries to feed the revolutionary spirit. And this is what Marxism's all about. And I hate to keep talking about Marxism. People get tired of it. Oh, well, that's old stuff. It's all about that. I mean, they call it different things. And even Karl Marx didn't invent it. The class warfare stuff was around long before he came along. But he came at a time where he could put it into printing. He could get those books sent out across the world, and he could reach a greater audience. And so that's what he did. But they're still using his stuff today to teach at school. They will twist it all the time. Oh, it's cultural Marxism, it's structural Marxism, it's this, that, and the other. And they change all these. Professors love to invent some fancy phrase, like microaggression or whatever, and they just think they're so smart. But it's the same message that they're trying to get across, and that message is division and emotion and hate. And once you get somebody hating the other group, and once you get their emotions stirred up, then you can send them out there and you can cause a lot of trouble and chaos in the society. These are the types of things that can stir up right around election time and actually turn an election over towards somebody else. Now, one of the things you need to understand about the Marxists is that they found out a long time ago that they had a little bit of a different animal in America. I mean, when it came to Europe and some of these smaller countries, and I mean, even in Russia's a huge country, right? But even then, during the revolution of 1917, the population was not that great. I mean, they had millions, surely, but not hundreds of millions. And the population was centered around, several large cities. And so the vast hinterlands of Russia were sparsely populated, and they didn't have to concern themselves with that. America's a different animal. It's a very large country, and you've got hundreds of millions of people, and you've also got a very big population that is in the suburban and rural areas. And they're armed, by the way. So the original concept of violent revolution to overthrow the system and to bring on this utopia that we all want was something that wasn't going to work in America, and this is something that the intellectuals figured out. Barack Obama, in his book, actually said that he realized in school there's no way we're going to have a violent revolution that's going to take over America. We would be defeated and we would lose. So we have to learn to fight within the system. And so this is what he was taught. And so this is what he's trying to teach the younger generation. And by fighting within the system, they just mean getting elected as Democrats and fundamentally changing America from within. And they do that by stirring up angst and causing chaos and causing trouble and causing hatred, all based on emotion. And then that way they can win some elections, and then they can change things from within. And that's what they've been doing for a very, very long time, and successful to some extent. And so you have to understand this. We're sitting in a situation now where we've got a couple of generations of children who have been completely indoctrinated into this kind of thought. I mean, from the time they're very young, the cartoons that they watch, even cartoons about global warming and stuff, it's all to throw this guilt into them. Look what your parents have done to the world, and you should feel terrible about this. And if you're going to help it, you're going to have to be one of our little foot soldiers. And the other thing they use is things like zero tolerance. You got these zero tolerance policies in little school, elementary schools and junior high schools and stuff. So what does that mean? Well, you're teaching young children that they are not to think. They are simply to do. You're told of what to do, and you cannot bring any drugs to school. Okay, well, I have a headache today, and so I'm going to bring an Anacin, right? I'm going to have an aspirin or an ibuprofen. I'm going to bring that to school because I got a headache today. And what do? They kick you out of school because they have a zero tolerance policy. You see, you're not supposed to think that I just have a headache and that an aspirin is not going to hurt anybody. Therefore, it's okay for me to bring an aspirin to school for my headache. No. You're not supposed to think that way. You are to conform. We tell you that you can't bring anything, and you simply march like a little soldier and don't bring anything. These zero tolerance policies are killing our kids as emotionally. They are taught to be little robots who conform to what authority says. If authority tells you to do something, you simply do it and you do not question it. This is how you get two generations of kids that end up, joining Antifa and stuff. And this is how you get kids on TV who say the stupidest things you've ever heard in your life. Because they were told to say those things. They conform. If they, you take years and years of programming, behavior and either ridicule or reward, one or the other. You have a behavior and you either have a reward or you have a ridicule or punishment. You do this for the entire time that you're raising a kid through the school system, and you will raise a whole generation of little Lilliputians who will simply do what they're told. That's not how we're intended to be in America. We're intended to be free spirits. We're intended to be individualists. They're just breeding it out of us, and they've been doing it for a long time. And so you have to understand that this is what happens. It happens at a very young age, and it's very difficult to overcome something that's been put in a child's mind during the formative years of their life. We've allowed this. We haven't paid attention, and to this day, parents just can't wait to get that letter from college that their son has been accepted. They're just tripping over themselves to send their kids to these colleges, and they're ruining them. They're ruining them, but they've been ruining them ever since kindergarten anymore. And so that's the way that stuff is going. The shaming and stuff and the way they use it. I don't know if you remember, not too long ago, Barack Obama was telling kids to go to their Thanksgiving dinner and to shame their parents, for being racist and bigots and homophobes and global warming and all this stuff. He was out there telling them, this is what you do, this is what you say. Hey, we have a little handout here for the things that you need to say to your parents at Thanksgiving this year. Shaming the parents. If that sounds familiar to you, it should. This is what they did in China. This is what they did in Russia. This is what they do in North Korea now. The idea of the younger generation shaming the older generation, many times publicly, many times just before they executed them. This is an old communist ploy, and they've done it for years, and this is how they shape a generation of people, and they hold a populace down. They hold down that dissent. Communists and progressives and liberals, they have to hold down dissent because they cannot have people debating policy and stuff. If you're going to start debating the actual policies and stuff, then the liberals are going to lose every time because they never have good policy. It's never successful. And so they have to hold down that type of dissent. They've done it for years. They always will. One example that I would give to you is you hear some story, and I hate to bring it up, but really, some terrible story about a person who's raped and murdered children or something, or a family that has 6 or 7 kids that they've just destroyed in awful, terrible ways. And we all sit around and we go, how does somebody do that? How in the world can a human being treat a child that way? And we go on and we're lost. We're lost because you'll never understand it. And the reason that you'll never understand it is that you're a reasonable person. You think with logic. You use common sense to figure things out. These people do not. Anybody who does something like that is not acting on logic and reason. They're acting on pure, unadulterated emotion. It's either hatred, or it's jealousy, or envy, or it's just fear, or confusion. There's a lot of different emotions that will drive human beings to do really crazy things. But it's not even a little bit. The guys that actually end up doing that kind of stuff, it's just full tilt emotionalism. Everything is about their emotions and them acting out on their emotions. And they have, ironically enough, they have no emotional attachment to the human being that they're doing something to. A logic, reasonable, common sense person attaches humanism to another human being. That humanity is attached to another human being, and we see that. an emotional wreck like a killer does not. They see no humanity in him at all. This is the same thing with liberalism. You're going into it as a logical, reasonable thinking person and trying to figure out how they think the way they think. Well, they don't think logically. And so you will never figure it out. It's all emotion, all the time. It's all about revolution, and it's all about changing everything. The other thing is that being emotional, what you're going to see is that the more they get defeated, the more shrill they'll get. And just like children, just like emotional children, they will act out. And so there's going to be more shrillness, there's going to be more hatred, there's going to be vile things said about us all, and there's probably going to be violence. That's just the way it is. It's always been that way. I wish it wasn't, but it will. Another thing, though, is to understand something. Once you understand liberals, once you understand where they're coming from and why they're doing what they're doing, then you understand that it's not important to figure them out. It's not important to figure them out. You don't know why they do what they do, and you don't have to. The only thing that you have to know is that it's destructive. It is destructive against the fundamental rights that this country was based on. Individual rights to life, liberty, and property. They are destructive to that. That's all you need to know. Once you understand that, you can go about defeating them, because that's all we need to do. You just got to defeat them. You have to ridicule them back. You have to defeat them. You have to ignore them, and you have to move on. And we're going to have to do that, and we're going to have to do it pretty quick. One thing that gives me a little bit of hope, to put it in some of the modern parlance, so to speak, the source code has been leaked on their little game. Okay? So this whole idea of using emotion against everybody did not work in the last election. They called Donald Trump everything in the book. He was a sexist, racist, homophobe, Nazi. Everything they threw everything they could possibly throw at this man. He shrugged it all off and moved forward and said, we're great and we're going to be great again. And he got elected. People responded to that message. This idea of everybody's a racist and everybody's a Nazi and everybody's a homophobe, it's not working anymore. Now, it's going to be interesting to see if moving forward that continues. And a lot of it's going to depend on the success or failure of the Trump administration. So far, he's been pretty successful, so there's some hope there. So just to let you know that that's kind of where liberals come from, and a better way for you to handle it is to just ridicule them too. Do it right back. Ridicule them, ignore them, and defeat them. Constantly bring up policy and ideas, because they cannot argue policy and ideas. Constantly bring up success, how conservative, traditional ideas are successful, and how socialist ideas are defeated, are not successful. They're failures. They always have been. Venezuela, China, anywhere you want to go. The socialism doesn't work. Look at Europe. Europe is just collapsing upon itself because of all of the socialism they've been doing since World War II. It does not work. It's never worked. And you just keep pointing it out, keep pointing it out, keep pointing it out. And then what do? They get crazy. They start calling you names. They start yelling and screaming and getting shrill. It's what they always do because they got nothing else. Because that's all they are. They're reactionaries. They're revolutionaries. They're emotional little children. And that's all they are. And we're going to defeat them and make America great again. Thank you all.